A black Navy SEAL accused of attacking a white police officer. No weapon, no video evidence, just one man's word, and a system primed to assume the worst. When James Carter entered that courtroom, he wasn't just a defendant. He was a challenge to their image, their ease, their authority. The judge didn't pause. "Cuff him," he declared right in front of everyone. No questions, no defense. But James stayed calm, knowing something they didn't. In minutes, their case against him would begin to unravel. What kind of man transforms a courtroom designed to break him into one forced to hear him out? Like, comment, and subscribe to find out how it all started.
He didn't move like a guilty man, nor did he stride like a hero. James Carter walked through the courthouse doors in a simple gray suit, shoes polished but worn, hands relaxed at his sides. No medals, no military insignia, no lawyers guarding him. Just him, a black man stepping into a room of white faces, fully aware of the story they'd already scripted for him. He glanced around briefly, just enough to sense the cold in the air. The silence wasn't born of respect, but of expectation. The kind that says, "Sit down. Stay quiet. We've already decided who you are." Judge Harrison sat at the front, silver hair, eyes like frost. He didn't look at James as he entered. No nod, no blink, just scribbling notes, waiting for the room to hush, as if he'd judged him the moment the door swung open. Officer Bennett sat at the prosecution bench, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, his uniform so crisp it seemed steeped in contempt. He leaned back, smirking like he did in the booking photo, a look that said, "I've got him." Not because of James's actions, but because of who he was. The charge was straightforward: assaulting an officer inside a precinct. No video footage, no notable bruises on Bennett, no weapon on James. Just a report, and the unshakable word of a white cop against a black man. As James sat, the room's tension didn't fade. It grew heavier. The bailiff eyed him too closely. The clerk typed too slowly. A woman in the front row gripped her purse like it might escape. Every action felt weighted, as if the floor itself resented his presence. The court-appointed lawyer leaned in, young, nervous, fresh out of law school by his look. His whisper was soft. "Stay calm, Mr. Carter. Don't speak unless prompted." James didn't reply. He stared ahead, like he did on missions when the unknown loomed, but someone had to hold steady. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his tone sharp and final. "This court is now in session. We're here for State of Virginia versus James A. Carter, charged with assault and obstruction during lawful detainment." He paused, eyes finally meeting James's. No curiosity, no patience, just the cold certainty of a man who thought he knew the world. "A decorated Navy SEAL," Harrison said lightly. "You'd expect better judgment from someone trained to protect, not attack, our officers." James didn't react. He didn't need to. He understood the game. Bennett stood to give his statement, his voice loud, clear, rehearsed. The defendant came into the station agitated, confrontational. I asked him to remove his jacket. He refused. When I approached, he raised his voice and pushed me back. Some in the room nodded, not out of belief, but because it fit their preconceived narrative. James turned slightly, not toward Bennett, but to the space between them. His voice was steady, unshaken. I never touched him. The room fell silent, not because they listened, but because they didn't want to hear. Harrison leaned forward, elbows on the bench. "The evidence will speak, Mr. Carter." But there was no evidence. Bennett's body cam was corrupted. The security footage was mysteriously missing. All that remained was testimony. And in this courtroom, testimony had a color. From the back, a whisper. "That's the seal from the news," another voice replied. "Doesn't matter. They said he got violent. The attorney raised a hand. Your Honor, we request a delay until the body cam footage is recovered. No, Harrison cut in. We proceed. No hesitation, no debate, just authority. As if James's service, his sacrifices, meant nothing now. Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking at James directly for the first time. Not as one man to another, but as a mechanic inspecting a broken part. You may have worn a uniform, he said, but here, you're just another defendant. James held his gaze, unmoved. Then came words that shifted the air. Some men enter a courtroom already condemned, not by law, not by truth, but by their skin. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone felt it. The war James left behind had found a new battlefield. They teach you to describe a threat not by actions, but by appearance. Bennett stood before the court like he was telling a ghost story, each word chosen with care. He was unstable, aggressive in stance. I gave 3 verbal commands. He ignored them all. The jury absorbed it like scripture. None asked what the commands were. None questioned why a decorated seal would snap in a precinct, in daylight, with no weapon, no motive. He squared up, Bennett added, like he was ready to fight. I feared for my safety. That last line was the knife, not because it was true, but because it didn't need to be. Fear in this courtroom wasn't measured by facts. It was measured by color. Harrison folded his hands, glancing at the defense. The young attorney stood, clearly unready for the storm ahead. Your Honor, we're still awaiting confirmation on the body cam footage. It may what? Harrison interrupted, voice sharp. Disappear into thin air. The room chuckled. Bennett didn't smile, but he looked pleased, as if the laugh was his. We request a brief continuance, Your Honor, the lawyer pressed, flustered. The footage is critical to assessing Officer Bennett's account. Harrison leaned back, his pause calculated, like a predator toying with prey. This court doesn't chase fairy tales, Counselor. To the jury, he added, almost casually, it's remarkable how often evidence vanishes when someone wants to stall the obvious. That line lingered, a dismissal and a warning, not for James, but for anyone who dared believe him. At the defense table, James stayed silent, hands on his knees, fingers clasped, shoulders still, eyes steady. He looked like a man who knew protest only fueled the flames. In rooms like this, silence wasn't agreement, it was survival. Bennett returned to his seat. As he passed James, their eyes met for a moment. Bennett's gaze was that of a hunter eyeing a trophy, not out of fear, but out of ownership, believing the system was his to command. The jury, mostly white and middle-aged, watched James like a dog behind a fence, quiet but potentially dangerous in their minds. The attorney tried again, less sure. Your Honor, proceeding without the body cam risks a miscarriage of justice. Harrison didn't blink. This court moves forward with the testimony we have. The officer's account stands unless disproven. So far, I see nothing here that disproves it. A faint rustle swept through the benches, the sound of people settling into a verdict before the story ended. James shifted slightly, not in defiance or frustration, just to ease his fingers, stiff from the room's cold tension. He looked past Harrison, past Bennett, to something they couldn't see. The attorney whispered, "We'll raise it again later." "Stay steady." James gave a single subtle nod. A woman in the gallery murmured to her friend, "Wasn't he in the military?" The reply came with a shrug. "Doesn't mean he didn't do it. You know how they get after combat." That word, they whispered softly, cut deeply. Harrison tapped his pen on the bench. Let the record show the defendant has not directly rebutted the officer's statement. Of course he hadn't. There was nothing to rebut in a scripted process. In this courtroom, James wasn't a SEAL, a veteran, a father, or a neighbor. He was a symbol the state aimed to dismantle quietly, methodically. And in that calm, the system seemed serene. But it wasn't serene. It was satisfied, crushing silently while you sat. The room held its breath since the last testimony. Harrison scribbled on his notepad, his hand careless, mind already set. The jury grew restless. Then Bennett stood again, his face eager, like he'd been waiting for this. "Your Honor," he said, half turning to the bench. "Based on the defendant's demeanor, I believe he's emotionally unstable. For everyone's safety, I request he be restrained." No twitch, no raised voice, no movement from James. Nothing. He hadn't stirred since the hearing began, yet Bennett painted him as a ticking bomb. Harrison didn't glance at James. "Granted." The word hit like a gavel, echoing through the courtroom. No discussion, no second thought, just granted. The bailiff paused for a moment, perhaps uneasy, perhaps instinctive. But orders were orders. Then something odd happened. James didn't react. He stood slowly, not in protest or fear, but with calm precision. He offered both wrists, as if he'd done this before, as if he knew the script. That stillness unnerved the room. The handcuff's metallic click pierced the silence. Not loud, but out of place in a courtroom, before a jury, on a man who hadn't raised his voice. From the back, a voice broke through. "This is wrong." Heads turned. A woman in her mid-40s, in a deep blue blouse, clutched her handbag like a shield. Her voice shook, not with fear, but rage. "You see what's happening," she said louder. "You're all just going to sit there and act like this is normal?" Harrison slammed his palm on the bench. "Order in the court." But the tension had cracked. James turned slightly toward the woman, giving a faint nod, as if acknowledging her anger, but urging her not to bear it alone. He faced the bench, wrists now cuffed, and said calmly, "You're not restraining me. You're comforting yourselves." The words stuck, unforgettable without repetition. Even Bennett blinked. Harrison leaned forward, jaw tight, but didn't reply. Perhaps he sensed pushing back would reveal more than he could handle. The woman in blue was escorted out gently, but her words lingered like smoke from a smoldering fire. The courtroom grew quieter than ever. Jurors avoided each other's eyes. The prosecutor scribbled meaningless notes. James sat, cuffed, spine straight, shoulders square, eyes forward. He didn't need to shout or plead. He'd said all they needed to hear. They just had to choose to listen. They tried to erase him with silence and steel, but some stories refused to stay buried. James sat, wrists cuffed, back straight, eyes unblinking. The courtroom had seen men fidget, tremble, yell. James did none of that, and it rattled them more. His lawyer finally spoke, his voice thin but resolute. "For the record," he began, standing taller than he felt. "Mr. James Carter served 14 years in the Navy, part of SEAL Team 6. He led classified missions protecting this nation at the highest levels. He's been honored for valor, restraint, and acts most wouldn't survive, let alone volunteer for." Harrison barely looked up, his pen tracing pointless circles. "This isn't a battlefield, counselor. It's a courtroom." The pause wasn't silent. It was a crack forming. James didn't speak at first, but his jaw tightened slightly, and the room's temperature seemed to shift. In the back, an older man, skin weathered like desert stone, removed his frayed Navy cap, marked USS Enterprise. He pressed it to his chest, lips trembling, eyes wet, saying more than words could. A memory surfaced. Years ago, in an Afghan forward base, James was one of 3 Black SEALs in his unit. The others were gone, one to shrapnel, one to a vague discharge. They'd taken a hill, neutralized a threat, saved a hostage. A young, white, bleeding private looked at James and said, "Didn't expect you to save me." James handed him water and walked on. The next day, he overheard in the showers, "War dog," said with a smile, like praise, and the room laughed. He learned bravery had limits. Some uniforms made you invisible, even when you bled. In the courtroom, James stared ahead, silent, but his presence carried the weight of a man who fought for a nation that didn't fight for him. Harrison kept writing, avoiding his eyes. The cuffs on James's wrists glinted like chains. The veteran in the gallery whispered, loud enough for some to hear, "Out there, he was a hero. Here, they call him a threat." No one argued. No one corrected him. The truth needed no defense. It wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about what this country chooses to see or ignore. James sat still, not powerless, but wise, knowing the loudest battles are fought in silence, making the world feel the weight. The courtroom stilled, not from fear, but from something unexpected entering. Not loud, not disruptive, just undeniable. A woman stood from the second bench, eyes heavy with memory, not anger. She walked forward steadily, holding a small black drive. Harrison looked up, irritated. "Ma'am, if you're not counselor on the docket, return to your seat," he said coldly. "I'm Dr. Sarah Thompson," she replied, voice steady. "I have evidence this court hasn't seen, footage deleted from the precinct server before the investigation started." A pause, not dramatic, just tense, uncertain. She placed the drive on the prosecution table. A clerk glanced at the judge, unsure. Harrison didn't flinch. "There's a procedure for evidence, Doctor. You're disrupting a hearing." "The chain of custody was broken long before I arrived," she countered. "This is from an off-site backup, the original precinct footage, time-stamped, verified, with metadata." Murmurs spread. Attorneys exchanged glances. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "How did you obtain this alleged footage?" Dr. Thompson inhaled. "My ex-husband, Major Robert Thompson, served with Officer Bennett. They were close until Robert noticed Bennett's pattern of escalating encounters with black men. After Robert's death in a car crash last year, I received his digital archives. This footage was there. Bennett never thought it would surface." Harrison leaned back, arms crossed. "You expect me to admit this? A civilian with an unverified drive claiming to be the missing piece." The prosecutor stood, hesitant. "Your Honor, if we—" "No," Harrison snapped. "No verified chain of custody, no forensics validation. This is hearsay in disguise." James didn't move. He hadn't since she entered. But his attorney, silent until now, stood. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "under Rule 902 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, verified digital video with unaltered timestamps can be admitted without testimony if authenticity is uncontested and the source is credible." Harrison blinked. The attorney pressed on. "The department failed to provide the footage. This witness offers a version with clear technical validation. Given her tie to an involved officer, refusing to review it denies material evidence." It was his longest speech, and Harrison had no quick retort. He glanced at Dr. Thompson, then the drive. "Fine," he said sharply. "Load it. We'll view it, but I note the introduction is highly irregular." Dr. Thompson nodded, stepped back, eyes on James. The clerk connected the drive to the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered, and no one breathed. What followed changed everything. The screen glowed blue, the room frozen. The footage was silent at first. No timestamp, no narration, just a grainy Willow Creek precinct hallway. James sat against the wall, wrists on his knees. Calm, unreadable. No raised voices, no resistance, until Bennett entered. He didn't walk in like an officer on duty. He moved like he had a point to prove. He loomed over James, jabbing a finger, leaning close, pacing. then slamming both hands against the wall near James's head. Someone gasped. The next frame had audio. "You think that uniform makes you better than me?" Bennett barked, face red. "You people don't know your place." James didn't move, didn't speak. Bennett pressed on. "You think that SEAL badge matters here?" Finally, James replied, voice low, even. "You don't own me. Not out there, not here, not in this uniform." It was no grand speech, just truth, sharp and clear. Then, abruptly, Bennett grabbed James's shirt, shoving him back. The chair fell. James hit the floor, but didn't fight back, didn't even raise his arms. The courtroom flinched. Someone muttered, "Jesus." The video cut, then resumed. James was back in the chair. An older officer, visibly uneasy, tried to pull Bennett back. Bennett brushed him off. Then the final line, clear on camera. "You think you're protected," Bennett hissed. "In this building, you're just a threat we can put down." Harrison stood. "Turn it off," he snapped. No one moved. I said, "Turn it off." His voice broke, brittle. The clerk froze, but James's attorney whispered something. The video played on. It showed Bennett leaving, adjusting his collar. James sat upright, staring at the camera, silent, unblinking. That silence burned. When the footage ended, no one cheered, but the air felt heavy with truth. People breathed differently. Harrison slammed his gavel twice, the sound hollow, panicked. "This court will recess," he started. James looked at him. "You don't want truth," he said, voice calm but sharp. "You want surrender. I don't owe you that." It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The courtroom didn't erupt. The truth spoke for itself. No one could unsee it. A lie that raw left no shadows. The recess was called, but no one moved. The room's air had changed. The truth undeniable. Harrison gripped his chair, his gavel useless. He cleared his throat, but it sounded weak. He looked smaller than his bench for the first time. The clerk whispered, unheard. Harrison stared at James, who sat still, hands folded, eyes certain. Not smug, not angry, just sure. Then James smiled faintly, not in triumph, but as if he'd known the outcome all along. He whispered to his attorney, who nodded, straightening a single paper. Harrison stood too quickly, adjusting his robe to reclaim authority. But no one watched him. At the back, a man in a gray suit stood. Silent all morning, he'd sat in the last row, still, observant. Now, he walked out with quiet precision. No one stopped him, but his exit pulled a thread, unraveling the room. James didn't watch him leave. He didn't need to. Harrison, rattled, shuffled papers, glanced at the door, wiped his brow with a sudden handkerchief. James spoke softly, just for those nearby. Silence has weight. You feel it when it shifts the room. It wasn't defiance, just truth, like he wasn't fighting the system, but letting it expose itself. A cough, a shifted seat. The courtroom tilted. The system hesitated, unsure, not from loud protests, but from one man refusing their script. That refusal held power. Quiet, undeniable. Harrison tried to speak, voice cracking. "Court will reconvene in 15 minutes. He left quickly, robe heavy, steps hurried. No one followed. James sat, calm, his faint smile gone, replaced by something deeper, clearer. He glanced at the camera, its red light blinking. The world would soon see the truth. Phones were ringing, emails opening beyond the room. One man's silence had shaken a loud system. Authority isn't always a robe. Sometimes it's quiet, waiting for its moment. When court resumed, the air felt lighter. People sat straighter, breathed softer, as if the walls listened. James was seated, hands resting, calm. Harrison's robe seemed heavier. his eyes flicking to the empty gray suit seat. The doors opened. A young man in a Navy uniform entered, silent, carrying a sealed envelope. He handed it to James's attorney and left. No salute, no word. The lawyer stood taller, holding the envelope like a verdict. "Your Honor," he said, clear enough to startle the stenographer. "We have an official communiqué from the Department of Defense, sealed, marked urgent." Harrison hesitated, then gestured him forward. The lawyer opened the envelope, scanning the pages. His face shifted, not loud, but clear. Arrogance faded from Harrison like a dimming bulb. His hand shook slightly as he grabbed the phone. He dialed, paused, then straightened, as if the voice on the other end snapped him upright. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm reading the letter. Can you confirm?" Silence, then a reply loud enough for the front row. "He's active, protected, direct authorization." Harrison froze for 5 seconds. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "This court dismisses all charges against Mr. James Carter, effective immediately. This proceeding is concluded." The words hung like smoke. No cheers, just silence. A room realizing it was part of something bigger. James didn't move or blink. Harrison avoided his eyes, stood, adjusted his robe, and left quickly, retreating. The gallery stayed seated, silent. The lawyer touched James's shoulder, whispering. James nodded once. Quiet. What followed needed no noise, no speeches, just gravity, filling the room. Court officers looked unsure. One reached for his radio, then stopped. Another stepped toward James, then halted, as if a line had been crossed, and they didn't know their place. James stood, steady, not to gloat, but to leave, on his terms. He walked out, past the pews, not looking back. People saw him not as a defendant or seal, but as something greater, forcing them to face their own silence. One truth remained. Real power doesn't demand the room. It changes it by standing still. The courtroom's silence commanded attention. Every breath, every shift echoed in Harrison's absence. He sat frozen, pale, sweating, eyes darting between the envelope and James, who stood in the room's center, unbidden, uncuffed, radiating presence. His silence outweighed the gavel. James turned to the courtroom, not pleading, but reclaiming something stolen. The room that once judged him couldn't look away. Then a woman stood, 60s, white hair in a bun, VFW pin on her coat. Her face held pride. No words, no applause, just stillness. Others rose. One, then another, then more. White, black, young, old, press, strangers, all standing. They hadn't come for history, but they witnessed it. Not a verdict, but a reckoning. No one led. The room knew dignity when it rose from injustice. That dignity was James Carter. James didn't smile or gesture. He met Harrison's eyes, not with anger, but recognition. The look for a man who chose cruelty over power and was now exposed. Harrison shifted, his robe too heavy for a man undone. A single sentence cut through, from an elderly black man near the front. He stood, voice soft but piercing. The room didn't cheer. It breathed. Some wiped tears, others clenched fists, holding years of fury. No one sat. James walked past the benches, each step reclaiming not just innocence, but humanity. Each person saw him anew, not accused, but seen. Near the door, a black boy, about 10, stared at James. "I want to be like him," he whispered. His father gripped his shoulder, nodding slowly. At the exit, the room stood still, quiet. No debate, no question. A man entered judged by his skin, left judged by his spirit. That verdict lives in memory, not records. The final narration lands. Dignity doesn't shout, it rises. The courtroom sat in eerie silence. James stood alone, free of cuffs, free of accusations. He didn't just exist, He owned the room. His steps carried the weight of all he'd borne. His eyes locked on Harrison, who once saw only a label: aggressor, threat, criminal. Now, Harrison couldn't hold his gaze. James stopped, faced the gallery, then the bench. "I didn't come for sympathy," he said softly, words filling every corner. "I came so truth could stand." Harrison shifted. "This isn't your stage, Mr. Carter." "No," James replied, steady. "It never was. It's your mirror." No one breathed in the long, uneasy pause. A black man in a gray suit stood silently. Then a white woman, eyes wet, clutching her purse, stood beside him. More followed. Black, white, uniformed, suited. One man's tears stayed unwiped. A woman's hands clasped like prayer. They didn't clap or shout, but no one sat. James whispered, "I didn't ask for this." "You don't have to," the older man said. "You earned it." Harrison's gavel twitched, unused. James faced him. "Remember what you said day one?" Harrison stayed silent. "You said this court doesn't wait for fairy tales." James paused. "This wasn't a fairy tale, Judge. It was a man telling the truth you cut off." Harrison leaned forward. "You were charged with assault." "That officer," James said, "assaulted the truth, and you allowed it." More stood. The gallery became witnesses to justice born not of rules, but clarity. James looked around, voice soft. "Dignity doesn't shout. It rises." He walked from the bench, no permission needed, like he owned the floor once used to drag him. No one sat, not by order, but because the room had shifted. Not law, standard. Some stories don't need noise to endure. James's story teaches that dignity stands, endures. In a world judging skin before truth, justice lies in those who won't break. If this moved you, like the video, share it with someone who believes in truth's power, and subscribe.